Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee, Art, Design, and Architecture. This show is coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves of the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy taking a break for some uplifting conversation. This morning's guest is Albena Yaneva, and she is a professor of architecture theory at the University of Manchester in the UK. She is the author of several books and the recipient of the RIBA President's Award for Outstanding Research. Her latest book is Latour Architects, published by Routledge in 2022. Good morning, Albena. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Tricia. Thanks for having me.
Now, I have a hot cup of tea here, black cup of tea. Now, on the show, I always ask, so what is your beverage of choice this morning?
Well, it's water at this stage, but I will have a strong espresso at the end of the conversation, perhaps, or halfway through.
Oh, that sounds good. We're going to get everybody's beverage choices on this show. So how are you doing this morning?
Excellent. Thank you.
We'll just jump into it. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and pronounce your name for the audience too?
Thank you, Tricia. So my name is Albena Yaneva, and I'm the author of this book, Latour Architects, which in a way I have started writing some time ago because I was trained by Bruno Latour in France, and I was trained in anthropology, sociology, and philosophy, and started some work in the field of architecture and contemporary art with my dissertation back in Paris. And in the past 20 years, I developed work in the field of architecture, architectural theory, by translating some key concepts and insights from the social theory of Latour and the pragmatist tradition of science and technology studies into the field of architecture and design studies. That's how I can sum up my work and the books I have published in the past 20-25 years. And you can see the obvious connection to the work of Bruno Latour.
Well, now we were talking before the show just a few minutes. Could you tell us where are you from and how many places have you studied? And you're in London now, the UK?
I'm based in Manchester at the moment, teaching at the Manchester School of Architecture. I'm originally from Bulgaria. I was trained in France, studied in École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, and then did my PhD at École des Mines with Latour, as I mentioned, and I have worked in different academic contexts after graduating. I worked in Germany at the Max Planck History Institute for the History of Science, spent some time at Harvard as well, and ended up working in the UK. And I have been here for 16 years already, working in Manchester, the University of Manchester.
So you're quite the global citizen.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Well, let's start with then. What was your motivation for writing this book?
Yeah, the motivation is intellectual and personal, I would say. So two type of motivations. Let's say I will start by the intellectual one. Bruno Latour is one of the most influential thinkers today, we might say, without any exaggerations. For instance, a recent article he has published at the start of the pandemic, shortly after the publication of this article, it was translated in 12 different languages, and because it was directly related to the topic of the pandemic, it traveled broadly. So this is just a simple example to show how influential his work is and how important this type of social theory could be in particular to architects. There are a number of books written on Latour already, but these volumes mainly look at Latour as a philosopher and introduce his theory as a philosopher, or look at Latour's intellectual biography as an author, or provide summaries of the key science and technology concepts he has developed. So I'm thinking about 3 or 4 different books in this field, but my book is different than these books because it aims to introduce the work of Latour to architects, and it outlines some key methodological insights in relation to architecture, some concepts that are particularly relevant to an architectural audience, I would say, of both professional architects and also design and urban scholars. And my motivation was to produce this book for architects, as I have been working in the field of architecture for the past 25 years, educating architects and collaborating with professional architects. So I felt the need to do this synthesis of the work of Latour for an architectural audience. So that was my intellectual motivation. Also, my work, the work I have developed in the past years, provides in a way a translation of these ideas in different empirical contexts, from the very first ethnography of the Office of Metropolitan Architecture I did using Latourian methods, to the very last study on architectural practice during the pandemic, which is again inspired by Latourian methods. So my own research work is closely related to this methodological insights. And on a personal level, as I have collaborated, Latour is a mentor, and I have collaborated with him in the past years. I see a lot of students, a lot of colleagues being interested by these ideas, and I felt the need to provide this summary and write this book for the community, for the intellectual community of students and colleagues that would like to develop these ideas further, and that I think the moment is particularly relevant. We are almost at the end of this pandemic of 2 years of closely witnessing the entanglement with non-human actors, which is a key concept for Latour. And the book explains in a way some key ideas and deploys these key ideas with the help of very specific examples, very specific empirical examples that I have carefully chosen. And I also show the relevance of these methods and ideas for architecture, and try to point to some avenues also for possible research in the field and for engagement with the profession. So that was the idea behind each chapter. There are these 3 moves: introduction of concepts, specific illustration of these concepts with examples, and specific reflection on the relevance of these examples for the field of architecture.
Well, let me back up a second because my master's degree is in landscape architecture, and so it's relevant. We're all related. But let me go back now. Who is Bruno Latour?
Yeah, Bruno Latour is a French social scientist. He's trained in philosophy, in theology, and anthropology. He first studied in France, worked a little bit in France, and then moved to the US, where he started his, in a way, first big empirical study of scientists at work in the Salk Institute. And he then spent some time in the US and came back to his native France in the 80s, the beginning of the 1982. To take a position as a professor of sociology in École Nationale Supérieure des Mines de Paris, which is an engineering school, very prestigious elite engineering school in France. At that moment, there were other scholars interested in in science and technology studies like Michel Calon, Madeleine Acriche, Antoine Ignon, and Latour, in collaboration with these scholars, they founded this Center of Sociology of Innovation, and in the following years, they work as a team to develop a number of studies in the field of science and technology with a particular focus on innovation, on technological innovations, and the whole tradition. So in a way, with this work, they established the tradition of science and technology studies. So he's one of the founders of science and technology studies. Perhaps his name is very often associated with STS more than other traditions, and this particular tradition, STS, was developed in the 80s, between the 1980s and 2000. These scholars, Latour, Calon, Acriche, Ignon, they developed seminal work on science and technology studies in the center. And this was also, the 80s was the moment of the aftermath of the post-structuralist wave in France, and this was a convenient moment for the development of new ideas. So these are the kind of the important years between 1980s and 2000s, and then 2008, Latour moved to another university, to Sciences Po in France, where he is currently an emeritus professor, still very actively involved in some programs like the Media Lab and other programs related to Sciences Po.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start off with, we're going to jump to page 114 in the book because um, I like to always talk about here with the cosmograms and about how in his the quote you put here, the politicians have never dealt with humans, but always with associations of humans and non-humans. And how do we address the question of what it means to live together in peace and to design new cosmograms? So, how are we going to address the question of how does he say we live in peace, and how does architecture shape a better world? What is his view of philosophy?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Tricia. He doesn't write directly on the particular role of architecture, but of course hints to possible contributions from architects, landscape designers, and artists. Contributions to rethinking the coexistence of humans and non-humans, which is extremely important issue for him. For a number of reasons. First, he's a big critic of the concept of nature, the old-fashioned concept of nature, which he considers as a modernist construction. And in his entire work, especially his writings on modernity, he criticized the distinction between subject and object, and as a way to bypass this dualism between subject and object, he talks about humans and non-humans. So non-humans could be any entities we are dealing with, things that we depend on from, if we take the example of landscape designers, for instance, from humidity, polluted air, soil condition, the different species we engage with, and we have to consider in our landscape project, and we can continue the list. So all these kind of entities, not just materials and objects, but they could be animals, species, regulations, soil conditions. So all these kind of entities that we engage with, that we have to take into account, that we need to provide with a voice so that our design or our project could provide some solutions for the cohabitations of humans and non-humans, would say Latour. So designers, in his understanding, will be the first to test these different ways of assembling the world, of crafting spaces where humans and non-humans can coexist in a different way, rather than the humans dominating passive nature or extracting resources or threatening the balance in nature, as we can see with current environmental issues. Your question also raises the kind of important concerns that we have also witnessed firsthand during the pandemic. The importance to rethink the role of non-humans, which we tend to neglect, especially in social sciences. We tend to treat objects as passive, the environment as passive, as a backdrop of our activities. And this neglect has led to many climatic and environmental crises, and recently the global pandemic as well. So COVID-19 in a way contributed to the rethinking of the role of non-humans in society, the fact that social links, sociality, even the concept of social distancing, which we have witnessed, cannot be considered without taking into account the non-humans, this virus that was there, that became very visible, very present, and that started reshaping social links and in a way redefining what society is, and we have become convinced that society cannot be in a way just made out of social links, but these invisible non-humans are part of societies, and they constitute social links in a way. So we have seen this demonstration, in a way, wonderful demonstration of the Latourian concepts in the past year or so, by following the path of this virus and by literally witnessing what this virus did to our societies, how it reorganized society and molded a completely different new alliance between cities, sciences, and social worlds. So this is indeed a very important question you're asking, and Latour's invitation is to professionals, all sorts of professionals, but in particular architects, artists, landscape designers, including designers, visual artists, and performance artists, even, because he has collaborated with different artists as well, to rethink the cohabitation of humans and non-humans, to rethink also the ways we visualize this coexistence, the way we dramatize the coexistence of humans and non-humans. So these social aspects are relevant to us, I would say, both architects and landscape designers, as we cannot imagine the work of landscape designers or architects without the rethinking of social links. And that's why also Latour's work is so relevant to architects. When we design a building, we're also crafting social relations. We're also reshaping social worlds. And that is why I would say Latour's ideas are even more relevant now that we have seen how this has happened in the last year or so with the global pandemic.
That's true. And when you were talking about, the non-humans, it made me think, like, this morning I was sitting out having my cup of tea, and how one little intervention can make a big difference. We have a little bird feeder hanging on a limb. This squirrel, I assume it was a girl first, and she climbs down a limb. She hangs on, drops, hits the bird feeder, swings it around, and starts eating. And we call her our little base jumping squirrel. And I was like thinking, and she comes down and talks to us now. She comes down a tree, she chatters to us and keeps going. It's like, yeah, it's we do have a connection, even though we don't speak the same language. She's she runs through our yard, and she has her little roller coaster through our yard, and it's really funny. And so it's like, yeah, they're sentient beings. They just don't speak our language.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but that's also something, as a landscape designer, you know this better than me, something that landscape designers are architects doing brilliantly in their work, trying to translate the voices, the needs of those birds, of those species, of those non-humans that are around us, and try to find ways to represent those voices into collective design where their presence will be acknowledged and coexistence could be crafted with designerly tools. So I would say landscape designers and architects are the best experts in crafting this cohabitation much more than philosophers and social scientists.
Oh, but we can learn a lot from each other. That's what we're doing here this morning. Let's. I'm going to go. Well, okay. I've got a slant a little bit here, so I'm going to go to Gaia on chapter 9. So, who is Gaia, and what does Latour? Uh, let's see. My question exactly was: what lessons did Latour's fears teach us about the built environment, and how can we survive better together?
Yeah, that's a very important and very big question indeed. So Latour has been always interested in nature with a major book, Politics of Nature, written shortly after We Have Never Been Modern. But in the recent years, his interest has shifted towards Gaia as a concept that is more relevant, more appealing. I will explain how. Latour moves from nature because nature is a concept that he considered old-fashioned, pretty much defined in the modernist tradition, a static concept that has no longer relevance to the current ecological crisis that we all witness. So he builds on the hypothesis formulated by the chemist James Lovelock and microbiologist Lynn Margulis, that living organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on Earth to form a kind of self-regulating complex system, and this is Gaia. This self-regulating system. This is Gaia, and Gaia is about this interaction between living organisms and the inorganic surroundings they have on Earth. So it's much more complex than nature because nature is passive and Gaia is interactive. Gaia is named after the goddess who personifies the Earth in Greek mythology. So Gaia is not indifferent as nature, as the modernist passive concept of nature. Gaia is local, but she cares and she feels for us. She also reacts to us. She can also eventually can get rid of us. Yes, she's so active. So she's an important figure. What is important for Latour is that Gaia is in a way a secular figure for nature, and this figure entirely replaces the kind of dichotomy of nature culture. He, in particular, in the past 10 years, he has been working a lot on Gaia. He has been collaborating with scientists, with geologists, and also geographers to explore this problem of Gaia, with a particular interest on the critical zone as well. And his main argument is that there was something that has been totally overlooked when the Earth was considered from outside. From Galileo's discovery that the Earth moved around the sun and the Earth is always at a distance. We usually visualize it as a globe at a distance, and we have entirely overlooked and simplified this, tells us Latour. Whereas Earth as Gaia is incredibly reactive to our actions, not that the Earth moves around the sun, but that it is also being moved by us. So there's this kind of interactions between the Earth doing things to us and we interacting and moving, modifying the Earth and the planet and the ecological conditions on the Earth through our actions from within. And that is why he constantly compares this interactive concept of Gaia with nature, which is indifferent to our actions, which we still read and interpret as a kind of 18th century concept, very modernist concept of passive nature, which we contemplate, paint on our paintings, which inspires us, but nature stands at a distance from us, so we can contemplate and contemplate it and draw it, but we also can dominate it and master it if we are scientists. So scientists, the experts, they could dominate nature, and nature remains passive. So this is a simplistic concept. Latour tells us this belongs to the modernist kind of understanding of nature, and we are no longer in this regime of thinking, as the gravity of the ecological crisis in a way has convinced us that we have to move to this simplistic understanding of nature, and we have to consider rather the concept of Gaia as this kind of interactive figure that we have. And therefore the fears and the lessons we learn, as your question was suggesting, that the lessons we learn and what we can figure out differently in our practices in architecture and landscape design will naturally start from this different understanding of nature as Gaia, nature not as something that landscape designers can dominate, master, and fully control. And again, you know this better than me, as through your knowledge on landscape architecture, how difficult the work of the landscape designer is, and how unpredictable natural entity, just like your bird in the morning, can be if we interact with those entities. That a total control of nature and the environment is not possible in the designer's work, but this interaction and a constant exchange between designers as humans and the many other participants in this process, and natural entities that we encounter in this process, trying to include them, understand them, is extremely important. In a way, I would say the visual language that we use also needs rethinking, because whenever we, in a way, communicate these environmental issues, we perhaps fail to communicate the gravity of the climatic transformations, the rapid degradation of landscape, for instance, or the threats to biodiversity, or the massive stores of pollution. All these issues, their gravity, their scale, the urgency of addressing those issues, perhaps we don't communicate this enough. And perhaps these issues are also not properly represented in our work, because we still, in a way, use conventional cartographic methods or scientific and cybernetic images. We rely on abstract visualizations, or use some kind of top-down aesthetic methods to talk about this phenomena, pretty much like the globe, the visualizations of the Earth as a globe that we see from a distance, and the difficulty to represent, in a way, these environmental issues had led to climate change skepticism, even to denial. And that's where I see an important role for landscape architects and designers, is to find the right visual and analytical tools to represent the gravity of these environmental issues, and to find the right representational techniques to rethink entirely perhaps the representational methods that have for long shaped how we look at nature. And designers and design educators, also in all the fields of design, should encourage students, colleagues, professionals to engage in this kind of thinking, to produce alternative accounts of environmental transformations. As Latour would say himself, a new politics of the cosmos is only possible if we can represent these issues, these very complex, intricate environmental issues in their multiple scales, in their gravity. And I think this is a chance for designers and design scholars to engage in rethinking of this regime of visualization, so that we can, in a way, map and trace the moves of Gaia, and manage to represent this interactive nature, this reactive nature of Gaia, the fact that we live within Gaia, within nature, but we also interact, intrude in this world, and we weave a web of connections that also might hurt or repair its balance. So to be able to visualize these connections, these intrusions, as Isabel Stengers would say, and this there I see a role, the crucial role of architects and landscape designers, design thinkers as well, rather than engaging in a kind of activist, militant, almost militant way of acting against climate change. Architects and designers can act from within, and they are better suited in raising awareness and in a way also offering new solutions for crafting the relationship with Gaia.
Oh, yes. Well, I do want to touch on, because I think that kind of brings the macro down to the micro a little bit. We talked about
Yeah.
Paris and the invisible cities. And I will say, I do love Paris. I've been there many times, and it's a beautiful city. And in here, he talks about, Paris for millions or Paris for two people, and that there are four moves that are important: transversing, proportioning, distributing, and allowing. Could you talk a little bit about Paris and why is it an invisible city?
Yeah, that's a very provocative title for a book on Paris, indeed. And I think here Latour refers very much to Calvino's Invisible Cities, and it also builds an argument in opposition to Balzac's Paris, which is a Paris for two, a Paris that we contemplate from the landmarks, from the top of the Eiffel Tower, or from Montmartre, or from La Tour Montparnasse, all these kind of panoramic views that we can get on the city. And this is an interesting opposition he builds between the panoramic and what he calls oligopticum view on Paris, the macro and the micro levels of analysis. And traditionally in urban studies, in architectural studies, we would engage in a kind of a panoramic understanding of the city. We'll find a point of view where we can see an overview, where Paris can be grasped from a distance, but this view is criticized by Latour, just like his understanding of the globe as a picture, as a static picture that we see from a distance. And in opposition to this panoramic or panopticum view of the city, he builds the concept oligopticum with the four moves that you mentioned: traversing the city, proportioning, etc. Oligopticum is a neologism entirely constructed by Latour in opposition to panopticum. Pan seeing everything, and oligopticum is seeing. Oligo is little, though seeing a little, but seeing it well. And this is in a core concept for Latour's pragmatist approach. Find the site that you can describe, find the site where you can trace the actions of a number of participants in the making of Paris. And he provides us with a number of different sites. So we visit, for instance, the police station, where we can see how Paris can be viewed through the cameras of many different monitors, and traffic the traffic center, where we can see how Paris traffic and the circulation of the city is being controlled, or the CNRS, a scientific office, and the office of an administrator, le Café des Flores, the very famous Café des Flores. We witness inhabitants of Paris, and one of the key characters is Alice, how Alice votes. So we witness different scenes, and it's a book that is written in a beautiful way, that goes into the details of the daily interactions and urban details of urban life in Paris, and brings us and invites us in a way to witness different oligopticons, different sites where a little can be seen on the activities of all those people in the police station or in the cafe, but it can be seen well with a lot of details of what happens in the market, how is a price negotiated in a market in central Paris, and how is a voter voting in the polling station. So all these very specific actions and what this means, and how they all together trace networks, the networks of weather, of mobility, of political votes, of market transactions, and how the overlapping of all those networks build Paris as a city. And it's that is why, through meandering through the city, we can understand the city rather than staying on the top of Montmartre and contemplating a beautiful panoramic view where we can see a number of landmarks, but these landmarks, we know they are in Paris. So the kind of picture we get by contemplating the panoramic will not lead us to a different understanding of the city, whereas when we go on the ground and follow Alice or Monsieur Renard and all the characters that we have in Paris Invisible City, is almost written like a novel, when we follow the actions of all those people and the daily interactions through the oligoptica that Latour invites us to visit, we can witness the Paris that usually remains invisible, and that's why the title is Paris Invisible.
Networks and the underlying structure of things to, if I understand it right, to enhance your designs, both architecture and
Exactly.
landscape architecture.
Yeah, in this book, he rarely talks about landscape architecture because he's more concerned about urban life, the urban artifacts in the city, all this kind of material structure, material texture of the city, the technologies, and all the urban networks that are there, meteorology, the sociological network, the metro network, the urban artifacts, the market networks, the voting networks, all these kind of networks that are there and that overlap to form Paris, and which usually remain invisible if we are to trace issues in the city, such as the obvious issues, for instance, of let's say urban activism, or if we are to take society, to understand society in the traditional way that sociologists understand society as composed of social groups or classes, then we remain at that level of analysis that in a way is predictable. But Latour invites us to witness the fabrication of the city networks, all this kind of transport, circulation, mobility, weather, security networks that are there and that sustain the vitality of the city, that bring the 2 million Parisians together, and that in a way also provide the conditions for the cohabitation of the 2 millions. And that's, as you started, with the distinction of Paris for 2 or Paris for 2 millions. Paris for 2 is the famous Balzac question of the panoramic with the 2 people sitting on the top of the Montmartre and contemplating the panoramic, but where you go on the ground, you discover 2 millions, and these 2 millions have to work together, to have to live together in a city and share a city together. So how does this happen? How and what kind of networks should be in place to make a city work? These are the questions of Latour. And in this book, Paris Invisible City, he provides a powerful agenda for a pragmatist analysis of city and urban design. I really think that this is an important book for architects to consider, urban designers as well, and design thinkers to consider in their work in the future. It's a little known, I have to say, and not the entire book is translated into English, although there are translations, and there was also an interactive website. Because the book, as you can imagine, works with a lot of visuals. And the very first publication of the book was also kind of in a very unusual standard. It was a very bulky book. You open it and you are lost in it. You have to literally stroll into the book as you would stroll in a city. There are different fonts that guide you. So there's a very specific kind of fonts design, very similar to the urban design that helps us find our way in a city. So that's a very interesting artifact also for artists and designers to contemplate if you come across the book. Fortunately, as I said, it's not translated in this original version with the design. It's not translated into English, but there's some versions, PDFs that could be found online.
Well, we talked a little bit about art too, and I do have an art degree and art history, etc. And of course, I picked up a few degrees along the way. Let me like everybody, and we keep talking a little bit about art and modern, etc. And I like to point out to the audience, they'll have to just buy the book on page 25. And to me, this double-faced Janus, this feels a lot very Picasso. And because we keep talking about how artists affect the city and how we all, work together with the nature and the built environment, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit about this diagram here, ready-made science and science in the making?
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting comparison with Picasso. Well, let me explain a little bit. So I really appreciate you your attention to the diagrams because this was one of the ideas we had at the start. Latour uses a lot of diagrams in his work, but we wanted to make these diagrams more appealing to an architectural audience, and I'm happy to hear that this works. And my student Alexandra Arène helped with the illustration, so I'd like to thank her for this help. As she's actually a landscape architect by training and completing a PhD in architecture at Manchester at the moment. And we spend a lot of time thinking of how to rework these classic diagrams and figures included in key works of Latour, how to reinterpret them architecturally for a design audience. And this double James face is usually a male figure. So we wanted to rework it. And there is a feminist touch. As you see, the Picasso effect was not intended, but I'm happy it's interpreted in this way. This classic juxtaposition that we see on the Janus face is typically Janus is a god of duality and is used by different philosophers to represent dualistic thinking. And by Latour, it was used as a metaphor to talk the duality of science as cold science, a science that is made already, that exists as fact, in opposition to science in the making. And the two phases of Janus are different to present this opposition between cold science and science in the making. We could use, of course, this diagram and translate this approach into an architectural thinking by saying that the static part, one of the right hand side of the diagram of the face of Janus is architecture made, the ready products of architecture, architectural design, landscape architecture, and the left-hand side becomes architecture in the making with all these kind of different figurations we have of the face. And On the left stands this the ready product of science and architecture, and the face is serious, it's static, the facial expression is in a way formal and restrained and represents this kind of static nature or mute nature of science or architecture that is in a way readily explained through social dimensions or political cultural factors that could form the context, and we usually bring this context to explain the product, the static phase. And on the other side we have science in the making or architecture in the making, we can say. And as we can see, the face is alive, uncertain, informal, perhaps changing and taking different shapes, and it cannot be explained by a given society. So that's the idea, that when we have a static product, we usually take and explain it. We attempted to explain it with society or social, cultural, and political factors. But when we follow science in the making or architecture in the making, everything is in the making, and we cannot explain the final product with factors that come outside the field of architecture, and we cannot reduce it to social factors. So to be understood, architecture, for instance, to be understood, we need to follow it in the making. That's the key concept that Latour conveys with this diagram, and the argument is on science. To understand science, we should not look at the ready-made fact of this cold, static phase, but we should follow science in the making, scientists in the process of working. And that's exactly the same approach I have followed in my ethnographies of architectural production, starting from the ethnography I did in the Office of Metropolitan Architecture back in 2001, 2002, when I started working there. And my idea was very similar, not to look at the final products, this kind of groundbreaking designs or iconic buildings from the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, like the Seattle Public Library you have in the States, or the CCTV Tower in Beijing, and we can continue the list of iconic buildings. To look at these buildings as static, so the static face of Janus would be to take the final product and then to try and explain it with social and cultural factors outside the realm of architecture. But it's a different thing to enter the practice in the Office of Metropolitan Architecture and to look at architecture in the making and to witness how these buildings have been produced, what kind of ideas have been generated, how these design ideas have been negotiated with engineers, clients, representatives of the communities, and witness this entire process of architecture of the making will give us a completely different understanding of the Seattle Public Library or the CCTV Tower in Beijing. So I think this example perhaps illustrates the two faces of Janus, or the two faces of architecture, as we might say. And they are also, in a way, also illustrations of these two approaches that Latour talks about, the critical approach and the realist, the pragmatist approach as well.
Oh, yes. That's fascinating. Yeah, and thinking about things as a living, breathing from different perspectives and integration, etc. Did I get that right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Which, of course, we can do only when we follow processes, when we follow the making of particular building projects, master plans, and try and find out the complexity of these practices, trying to understand the languages that architects, designers, but also other stakeholders use, trying to fully unpack their activities rather than explaining them quickly with a particular set of factors, social forces, for instance, or anything that has an impact on human action. which is usually something that critical sociology would do, and that's why Latour is so skeptical about the critical approach, which comes from the Marxist tradition and which has been dominating the thinking in the field of architectural history and theory. In a way, so this method is based on critique, and it aims at explaining every single experience, human experience, with belonging to some kind of social structure. So to explain why human acts in a particular way will refer to social factors or social structures that dictate a particular human behavior. And critical sociology has always, in a way, attempted to reveal, would say, even expose this kind of hidden social mechanisms that make us act, these hidden mechanisms on human action. To take this to Koolhaas's architecture, for instance, to understand these buildings, we can look at any kind of social mechanisms or cultural factors that had an impact on Koolhaas as a creator, as if we were to judge him as a 17th century genius. We can look at all sorts of kind of influences upon his work, theoretical influences, or indeed political and social mechanisms that have conditioned the production of particular building. But a pragmatist approach would rather mean the practices of everyone involved in this process, not just of this single creator, a star architect, but to try and unravel the diversity of actors and different networks that are there, that all have to be put in place for the creation of the building, or a master plan, or any product of architecture and landscape design we have at the end. And this requires us to converse with everyone, to follow the activities of all those participants in architecture and design making, and to try to understand their actions, not the hidden forces, social and cultural forces that have acted upon the humans and have guided their decisions, but what really happens when they design, what kind of actions they undertake, what kind of discourses they have, how do they explain what they create and how they conceptualize it. And by looking carefully at those practices and the language of all participants in this process, we can really understand how design happened and how these buildings became took the shape they took, and are so important for the societies and cultures where they have been created. So this is just a little example to illustrate this distinction between pragmatist and critical as research moves, and they also correspond to the two phases of Janus as well, the cold, the ready-made, and the one in the making.
Oh, yes, I see. Well, they'll just have to get your book. Well, Albina, thank you. That's right. We can't give them the whole book. They have to get just a part of it.
No.
um, Albina, thank you so much for being here today. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've learned so much. I didn't know Latour before this, so this has been very enlightening for me. Um, what an interesting person. Well, could you tell the audience before we part, what new exciting projects are you working on now?
Well, I just completed a study on the impact of the pandemic on the architectural designers during the past 12, 18 months, I would say. I have followed closely architects at work, but from a distance this time. So I was not able to go and visit particular practices, but it was through a questionnaire that I was able to collect responses from 130 architectural practices, mainly small scale practices. And this was quite interesting to witness the responses to the designers to the pandemic, the many interesting and innovative solutions they found to the restrictions and the constraints that the pandemic imposed in different parts of the world, and the very resourceful solutions they crafted in response to these limitations and to this major interruption in the design routines that we have witnessed. So it's a small book titled Architecture After COVID, which will be out next year.
Well, that sounds timely and perfect. We'll have to have another cup of tea and a glass of water then.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you again so much for being here today. This has been a really great conversation. And for our guests, the book is Latour Architects. It was published by Routledge in 2022. And I'll let Albena say her name. How do you pronounce your name?
Albena Yaneva.
And it will be here on the podcast link to her book. And thank all of you for being here on this Sunday morning. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you for having me.